You're listening to Gone at 21. This is The Investigation, Episode 2. Before we start this podcast, I have had a bad cold for the last week or so. Even though I'm getting better, please excuse my voice for this episode. Thank you for listening. Now to the podcast. After researching this case and speaking to several friends of Katelyn and John's, it was time to make arrangements with the client to take my first trip to Fairfield, Ohio. Before I could mention it, my client calls me and asks, "Do you think it's time to go to Ohio?" Well, yes. Yes, I do. While making my arrangements to head off to Ohio, I continued to speak with witnesses. My first call was to Andy Hicks, the man who found Katelyn's remains. I learned several new things about Katelyn's final resting place that were new to me. First, contrary to what Tammy told me earlier, a plastic bag was wrapped around Katelyn's skull. Tammy said there was a plastic bag under the skull or near the skull. These two descriptions of where the plastic bag was located was huge. I questioned Hicks and he told me his wife pressed a stick on the bag and popped it, and the skull and hair were discovered. This means someone placed the bag over Katelyn's head. The second thing I learned from Andy was the water from the creek hasn't risen to the level where Katelyn was found in nearly a decade. So, she definitely didn't float there. I wanted to speak with John Carter before I made the trip to Ohio. I had to convince him to meet with me. So I formulated a plan. I contacted Heather Hapney, and she reached out to John to inform him I wanted to speak to him, and also to tell him it was okay to talk to me. Heather vouched for me. Then she called me back and said he would speak with me over the phone. All I had to do at this point was convince John to meet with me while I was in Ohio. While speaking to John, I convinced him I thought he was a scared kid who lost his fiancée. He ate it up. I told him I was coming to Ohio and wanted to sit down with him and talk to him about what took place before and after Katelyn disappeared. John said he would meet with me, but wanted to talk to his mom first, to see what her schedule was like. You see, John said that Karen Winkler, his mother, was his support system and would not talk to me without her. I was agreeable. If she liked to talk, she could help me out tremendously, without even knowing it. I couldn't just go to Ohio and start working as a private investigator. I'm only licensed in the state of Florida, so my client and I had to find an investigator in Ohio that would join the case, preferably as a polygraph examiner, and allow me to consult through his or her agency while on the case in Ohio. I found Brad Kelly, who owns a private investigation agency and was a polygraph examiner. Brad was very experienced in polygraph work, and he worked as a law enforcement officer and detective. He conducted polygraphs for the department he worked for before opening his own agency. Brad agreed to allow me to consult for his agency, and my client paid Brad and signed a contract to bring him on board. He was paid for several polygraphs up front. I knew who I wanted on that polygraph machine, but the question was, will they agree to take one? I'm very picky about the people I work with. Brad seemed to have enough experience and the right kind of experience.
Yeah, my name is Brad Kelly. I'm a clinical forensic polygraph examiner out of the state of Ohio. My experience consists of being a private investigator for 17 years, previous law enforcement as a sex crime detective with one sheriff's office in Ohio, and was also a sergeant at another sheriff's office.
The two most important parts of the trip are now taken care of. Now, I just need to find an assistant to take notes and keep me awake on the trip. Anna, a longtime friend of mine, had secretarial experience and was available to go up with me. Anna and I worked out specifics, and I had my assistant. Before I left for Ohio, I had a meeting with the client. I updated him on the progress of the trip and got a check from him. He told me David Markham is who we are working for. David is your client. I'm just the benefactor. So whatever information he wants from your investigation, give it to him. So it was made clear David Markham was my client. He had the final word. I will say this, David Markham has never interfered in the direction of my investigation. He wants the truth and wants a full investigation, which he believes he didn't get from Fairfield Police Department. So, the rest of this podcast, the man who financed my investigation will be referred to as the benefactor, because he made it clear he was not the client. A couple days later, Anna and I were off to Ohio. After arriving in Ohio, within 2 hours, Cincinnati was hit with an Arctic blast. Let me repeat that for you, an Arctic blast. I just came from 80-degree Florida weather to 2 below zero. Anna and I were freezing. It was apparent we were out of place. The only vehicle owner in the entire hotel parking lot that didn't prepare his vehicle for the incoming snow, you guessed it, the Florida boy. The maintenance man of the hotel actually saved us. He pulled our windshield wipers up so they wouldn't freeze to the glass. In the morning, my vehicle was the only one that had a scraped windshield and snow around the tires shoveled. He knew we had no clue and took pity on us. All the other cars in the parking lot were from northern states, so the owners had already prepared. The first morning I was in Ohio, I received a call from a detective. This detective told me a local Ohio PI working the case, one that David Markham hired about a year and a half earlier, but was no longer under contract with, complained that I shouldn't be there working the case because I wasn't licensed in Ohio. I explained to the detective I am consulting for Brad Kelly Investigations and Polygraph, and I offered the detective Brad's number and information to confirm it. My first reaction, this PI is scared that I would solve the case and he would be out the reward. I then called him a series of names under my breath, shook it off, and continued to get ready for my first face-to-face interview in Ohio. My first meeting was with Ryan Isaacs and Heather Hapney. We met at the Steak and Shake across from my hotel. A month or so prior to this meeting, I asked Ryan if he would mind driving around Fairfield in an attempt to locate Leonard with me. You remember Leonard. He was the one that claimed he was there when Katelyn overdosed. Many people say they see Leonard walking around Fairfield, and I wanted someone he knew to go with me so Leonard wouldn't freak out and maybe speak with me more in depth if I was with someone he knew. Ryan told me he was on a felony probation, needing to pay $143 to get off of it. I mentioned this to my benefactor and he said, "I'll pay it." I told the benefactor I don't pay witnesses or give money to them because if the case makes it to court, paying witnesses doesn't look good. And it doesn't matter what you paid them for, kind of like you're paying them to testify a certain way. Or at least that's how the defense attorney is going to twist it. The benefactor said, "I want him to help you, so I'm going to pay it. I told him I'm not involved in that. The benefactor said, I understand. He obtained Ryan's address and sent him cash. I warned the benefactor about sending money. I advised him there's no way to know if Ryan got it unless it was sent certified or signature required. The benefactor didn't listen. I got a message from Ryan while en route to Ohio. He informed me the benefactor's payment didn't arrive. I could see this coming. I told the benefactor, and he asked that I give him the money from the expense money for the trip. I told him I'm not involved and would not be giving him any money. The benefactor then asked if Anna wouldn't mind giving Ryan the money. Anna agreed. So after sitting down and ordering, Anna slid the money over to Ryan. I really suspected Ryan received the benefactor's first payment, but I went with it and didn't cause any issues because I needed both Ryan and Heather's help at this point in the investigation. I also wanted them on a polygraph. If I was going to get their help and they were going to take a polygraph, I needed to keep my mouth shut. At this meeting with Ryan and Heather, we spoke mostly about Ashley Griggs and getting her into a meeting with me and getting her to agree to take a polygraph for me. You see, she was not returning my calls, and friends of hers were telling me she was back on drugs. We also spoke about Leonard and how we would approach him. After we left the meeting, I wasn't so sure I wanted Ryan to help me. Trusting him was going to be hard, especially after what he claimed about the benefactor's money not getting to him. In my opinion, this was an attempt to double up on money from the benefactor. But I did want a polygraph from him. So I just won't mention helping me to Ryan. I'll find Leonard if I need to. I just won't bring it up. After I was done with Heather and Ryan, my next interview was that evening. It was with John Carter and Karen Winkler. You heard some of John's first interview on the first introduction series. So let's hear some of that interview that you haven't heard. First off, let's listen to what John says about a possible theory as to what happened to Katelyn. I also asked if he had concerns about some of his friends. What do you think happened, number one? And number two, do you have any concern about some of your friends?
First of all, I generally prefer not to make theories. There's hundreds, millions, sure, even in my own head. You know, and for me to say, I think this is it, I can't.
Okay.
I can't do that.
Okay.
As far as friends, I know that immediately after, how about this, as far as associates, my friends, my closest friends, the ones I have known for years and years, all of them have been there. All of them have. I didn't want to leave my house, and I didn't want everyone to come in here and pile in. I would sit in my driveway in a lawn chair, and a friend would come over, and then another one, and another one. I wound up having whole circles of friends that would sit around me and talk to me. I had a girl named Michelle Feist. The first time she ever came by, she cried for the entire time. She would not stop crying. I found out later, because on my way into work, when I worked for Miami University, Oxford, on my way in, or leaving work, I got a phone call from a guy. He said, I know you did it. You better fucking confess. I said, fuck you. Who the fuck do you think you are calling me like this? You don't know anything about it. You don't know a damn thing. I don't even know who the fuck you are. He said, I'm Michelle Feist's boyfriend, and I know you fucking did it. And I started screaming at him. And I couldn't believe it. I was beside myself. I couldn't believe that she thought that. And finally, I hung up on him after so much of it. And Michelle herself called me back. And she said, I want to know what happened. And I said, you know what? You are her best friend. Before all of this, hell, she was her best friend. She wasn't at that time. And she wasn't for months before that time.
Okay.
But I said, you deserve to know you were her best friend, so I'll tell you the story. And I told her exactly what I've told you so far. Mm-hmm. I told her what happened that night. I told her what I did. I told her what happened the next day. I told her everything. She still didn't believe me. And she said that I should, she didn't understand why I wasn't crying when she came over. And I told her that I'm not going to grieve the way that she wants me to grieve. I'm not going to live my life as though I'm worried about what other people think of me. I don't concern myself with what other people think of me, so much to the point that I can ignore them. And I don't have to talk to them. I don't have to talk to the people who are crazy, who are yelling about how I'm a murderer or I'm somebody who would do something like that. Because it's not true, and you don't know me, you don't know her, and you don't know the situation. And that's how I feel about that. But on top of, with what Michelle was saying, and the fact that she said she could believe in her heart, whatever she wants to believe, I let it go. I said, you know what? I've told you everything you've wanted to know. I've tried to tell you, and you're obviously not going to listen to me. So this conversation is over. And I hope that you never call me again, because I'm never going to call you again.
John is experiencing some friends that are on the fence about his involvement. John talks about Ashley Griggs and a comment Ashley's grandma made to him.
I didn't necessarily have issue with Ashley. Okay. I will say this. Ashley seemed to be back and forth with siding with me or not siding with me.
Right. Thinking you did.
Yes. I remember her coming over a few occasions after the fact. I remember her grandmother being in the driveway before she was ever even found and saying to me, she's in heaven now, so you can just rest easy. And that struck a chord with me. I didn't know why she said that.
Yeah.
But I think that she just assumed. That's what my write-off in my brain was. I just assumed that she just made the assumption that she was dead because she had been gone for however many weeks or months it had been since then, and she might have been under that impression of the first 48 hours after that it's over. That whole thing.
A lot of people made that kind of a comment. That,
in fact, most people...
And they would be shocked when I would say, no, I will have hope.
It was apparent that John was trying to move on, if you believe what Ashley said about John hitting on her. So let's listen to John speak about his first girlfriend just 7 months after Katelyn went missing.
After 7 months, I wound up meeting a girl, and I dated her and actually wound up living with her for a while. But it was mostly because
that was Kayla?
I got that a lot. Kayla,
okay.
Yes.
Okay.
I kept saying, why are you moving in so quickly? And he said, because I can't let her be alone. She can't stay in that place by herself.
Mm-hmm. Less than a year after Katelyn went missing, John is dating someone. Of course, it was suggested he started looking much earlier. Karen and John talk about being watched by people following Katelyn's case on Facebook. John also goes into a claim about him and Heather being spotted at an ice cream shop, and what he says he and Heather haven't done.
I'm going to interject if you don't mind.
Okay, go ahead.
On Facebook, there was a benefit for Katelyn, and people would come up at different times and ask me questions. I heard this, I heard this, I heard this. But on Facebook, they would talk about going places where one of us was and ask us questions and, hanging. Yeah.
They followed me to Bob Evans. When I started dating Kayla, they would follow me to places we would go out to eat. They claimed that I was at like Flubs, trying to have ice cream. I had been to Flubs once. It's an ice cream place.
Okay.
And they said that I was there with Heather and that I was making out with Heather. I've never even kissed Heather. I've given her a kiss on the forehead, but I've never like even made a move on Heather.
Heather's been his friend forever.
Moving on to some questionable people in Katelyn's family on her mother's side. Katelyn has an uncle, Steve, who is her mother's brother. He has had his run-ins with the law, everything from drugs to weapon charges. His normal residence is at a family property formerly owned by his parents, Katelyn's grandparents, in Hamilton, Ohio. The property has stables on it, has several acres and a house. Let's hear what Karen and John have to say about the uncle and the property.
Stable. This other person that my brother knew. And they wanted to go, I don't know, take care of the horse or whatever. And when they got there, they couldn't get in because the police were searching the property. That supposedly this uncle cooked meth all the time on the property and the police would raid it. But that supposedly one time they went to raid it, he said, I know who killed Katelyn, it was her mother. So they started checking all through there.
You know,
I don't know any truth to any of that. All I know is one time I called Dave and I said, and it was very early on, I called her father and I said, this is what I heard, that something about this uncle. And I said, Dave, do you think he has anything to do with it? And he said, I wouldn't be a bit surprised. He goes, Karen, he's a really bad person.
He is. He scared her. He scared Katelyn one time. I remember her telling me the story where he would. He showed up at their house in the township randomly, which, by the way, the house in the township and her grandparents' house, they're right next to each other.
Okay. But they still live in the house now? They just don't own the stables?
The grandparents?
No, there's a house on the stables.
Okay.
And then Katelyn used to live in a house on Indian Springs Road that was not too far from the stables. Not too far from, but it was kind of up the road.
Okay.
Before her parents got divorced.
But apparently, she told me the story about how he showed up and he went to the back door and just came in the back door while Katelyn was watching TV, and she freaked out. But she realized it was him, and it wasn't a big deal. But that she was really freaked out by it, and that it really scared her that he showed up like that. He didn't do anything or hurt anyone or do anything wrong, he just walked into the house like that.
Yeah. Sherry Markham, Katelyn's mom, as far as I know, has never taken a polygraph. I know law enforcement hasn't given her a polygraph, at least that's what I've been told. I've attempted to contact Sherry multiple times, but my calls were never returned. While speaking to an aunt of Sherry's, the aunt told me Sherry's not going to call you. She's not going to talk to you. She goes on to tell me that side of the family is very private, even before Katelyn disappeared. I spoke to law enforcement about giving Sherry a polygraph after hearing the following stories that Karen and John told me.
I had concerns about the mother because I had only spoken to her one time, and Katelyn had told a story about something that had happened when she was younger that disturbed me beyond anything, that a mother could treat her child that way. And so when all of this happened, I thought, well, maybe her mother got upset, and that maybe her mother got upset. I believe her mother was bipolar. I don't know if she was diagnosed, but I believe she. And just a lot of things that I had heard. But, so I was in New Orleans. My grandchild was being born. Sherry had tried to contact me. She is texting me in my driveway. I'm down in New Orleans. And she's saying, well, I'm over here. I've been wanting to talk to you. Well, in the meantime, my husband saw her outside and went out and talked to her. And he said, and they were talking for a little while. I said, well, why don't you come on in? And she said, oh, okay. And so they came in, Allie was with her, and they were talking, they were in here talking, and then she made a comment about having some of Katelyn's art, that she didn't have any of Katelyn's art, that Dave had it all. Did we have any art? And he said, oh yeah, we have a few pieces, and she wanted to see them. So I had them in this other room, and I had a bed, and the one piece she had given me was behind the bed, on the wall behind the bed, and another piece was over the TV on the other side of the room, and then there were 2 more pieces on the wall.
And one of those 2 were mine.
Yeah, one of them was John's. So Steve goes,
for Katelyn, by the way.
Steve goes, well, he goes, oh, there's some more in the other room if you'd like to see it. So he walked across the hall into the other room.
I thought he was like getting her a glass of water.
No, he walked into the other room on the other side and saw her walking out. She'd taken the pictures off the wall, put them in her car, and left.
She stole the pictures off the wall, including my painting.
Yeah.
The one I made. I did that.
So I told Becky about it, and I said, Becky, I'm beside myself. And she's like, Karen, I know you've been uncomfortable with Sherry. She said, but Karen, I just think that she's a
weird.
Yeah, kind of a weak.
Yeah.
Feeble, kind of fragile person.
Katelyn has told me once, and I told this to the other guy. Katelyn had told me once that her mom dealt best with toddlers. She couldn't handle adults. She couldn't handle babies, but toddlers, she was a pro. She knew what she was doing. She knew how to handle them. She knew how to take care of them.
Did she tell you any stories about growing up, maybe hostility towards her?
Yeah, there was a time when they went to a restaurant, and do you remember why she did that?
Katelyn, they were sitting in a booth, and Sherry and Allie were sitting on one side, and Katelyn was sitting on the other. And Katelyn went to open her ketchup package, and when she opened it, she accidentally squeezed it, and it squirted a little on Allie's hair. And Katelyn just thought it was funny and laughed. It was just completely unintentional. And her mother got up and took 4 packets of ketchup and emptied them on Katelyn's head and told her she couldn't touch it, and she had to keep it on her head the rest of the day. And they even went to a movie and everything.
Mm-hmm. There was a time when
Sherry...
Katelyn had like a whole set of balloons or something, and this is only a vague remembrance of the story, but she had like a whole set of balloons, and she was walking down the street, and Katelyn had done something that really upset her, so she just proceeded to pop all of her balloons, and for some reason this created, and obviously there was something more to it, because anytime that Katelyn would hear a balloon pop, she would cry. She couldn't help it. Wow. She would just start crying every time she heard a balloon pop. And I never understood why, and I kind of thought it was funny, but I never really took it seriously, but she really did.
Let me add this. David Markham has taken a polygraph and passed. If Dave had to take a polygraph, why didn't Sherry take one? Was she even asked? Ever since I've heard John Carter's account of what happened hours and days after Katelyn disappeared, I had this lingering question in my head for John. So I asked him. I asked John, why didn't he stay the night with Katelyn on that Saturday?
I would occasionally sneak in and stay the night. I would do it when I knew that her dad wouldn't be there in the morning. And I had to know for certain that he wouldn't be there that morning. When I wasn't certain, I wouldn't stay the night. I wanted to respect her dad, and I also didn't want her dad to come busting into her door with a gun. Like I was telling you when the recorder was off, he's a very stoic man, and he's a very serious man. I'm sure he cuts loose, but I've never seen it. And I didn't want to find out what would happen if I was sleeping with his daughter in his house while he wasn't there. So I didn't stay the night, and I wouldn't stay the night on most nights.
Did he tell you not to stay the night, or did he say...
He never directly told me not to stay the night. Katelyn was a very respectful person, and so by association, so was I.
Okay.
She wouldn't stay the night here out of respect for my mom. I wouldn't stay the night there out of respect for her father.
Okay. Of course, David Markham moved out of the townhouse but was still on the lease and paid the rent. So he stopped in every now and then. And I don't know if you caught it, but John said he was a respectful person by association with Katelyn. Matt Rokamp is John's best friend. One of John's best friends. Apparently he has a couple. He explains, or doesn't explain, what he was doing the Saturday Katelyn was last seen. Matthew, I'm going to take you back to August 13th, 2011, the last night Katelyn was seen by your buddy John, or anybody for that matter. What were you doing that evening?
I don't remember. It's been 4 years, and I smoked a lot of weed then, so...
Okay. Well, okay then. Let's go to the next day, Sunday, when John discovered Katelyn was missing.
I was actually sitting at my mom's in between my break from delivering at a Chinese restaurant. I called John to see what he was doing, and he was actually on his way to Katelyn's house because he had not heard from her all day. And he was worried because he texted her in the morning and she never messaged him back, and it's been almost the whole day. So I was on the phone with him, and as he went to her house, he's like, shit, her car's still there. So he goes, and he goes in the house. Then he's like, dude, she's not here. Let me call you back. And I was like, okay. He's like, dude, if you... And then, so I got off the phone with him, and he tried calling people, and I called him back again, and he said, dude, she's not here. She hasn't been at work. He's like, if you really care, come down here. So within 6 minutes driving from Camelot Apartments to her townhouse, that's how fast I got there. You know the distance. It's not a really quick thing to do, and I sped the whole way there.
Okay.
And I met John there, and that's when our friends John Palmerton and his ex-girlfriend Katie Harris met up with us there.
Okay.
And we all pretty much stood there until the cops got there, and we all went back to the police station and all talked to the cops, and the cops pretty much interviewed each of us individually.
Okay. Two things. The first thing was Matt said he called John back. On the phone records, it does not indicate that he called John back. A portion of Matt's interview was taken out in reference to Sunday's events. I'm going to save it for later because I want to evaluate his statement against John's statement in reference to a certain subject. So we'll be hearing a little more from Matt later on. I asked Matt about drugs he saw Katelyn use. Remember the drug claim? Have you ever seen Katelyn do any drugs other than pot or shrooms?
Maybe we all smoked opium at a festival once.
Well, opium is a natural drug, and most of her friends say that John and Katelyn stuck to the natural stuff. We've only had one other person say that, to this point, say that Katelyn did anything other than natural drugs. Tammy told me Matt was seen in Cedar Grove, Indiana, where Katelyn's remains were found, before the news crew showed up, which would mean Matt knew what was being discovered. I asked Matt about this claim. Someone thought they saw you in Big Cedar right after Katelyn's body was discovered in Indiana. Was that you?
Big Cedar.
Yeah, Big Cedar, Indiana.
I don't believe so.
No. Did you go to the site where...
No, I haven't been there.
You haven't been there?
Mm-mm.
To be fair to Matt, at this point, the car that he was driving back in 2013 and the description Tammy gave me did not match. Matt would be asked about this Cedar Grove visit on a polygraph that took place a couple days after this initial interview. Amber Morgan was one of Katelyn's friends. If you remember, Ashley Griggs said she was one of the women John came on to within a couple months after Katelyn went missing. Let's hear what Amber has to say about that claim.
He wasn't really very forward with me. Like, he wouldn't make remarks like, anything sexual or anything like that. It was more of just one day he had mentioned that he kind of, had feelings for me and asked if I had feelings for him. I had told him that I didn't think of him like that it was strictly a friendship to me. I mean, we would go out occasionally to dinner, just the two of us, or go out and see a movie, but there was never, we never kissed, we never held hands. It was nothing of that nature.
I asked Amber to be a little more specific about what John actually said to her.
He had asked me if I was interested in being with him, and I told him no, that it wasn't like that for me, and basically it was left at that.
Amber told me it was 3 or 4 months after Katelyn disappeared that John came on to her, and then after looking at the dates and remembering a little better, she came back and said it was actually between 8 and 9 weeks, and was able to pin it down a little better. This is somewhat suspicious to me, how John could just move on so quickly. After 2 months, he was with Katelyn for 6 years. And another thing, if he starts dating one of Katelyn's friends and she comes back, how awkward is that going to be? Amber told me about visiting Cedar Grove twice after Katelyn was found, and a discovery that a friend that went with her made while they were looking around.
The first time I went with a friend of mine, Kelsey, and my cousin Matt, and we just, it was, I can't remember the date. It was shortly after they put up the cross. We took, Kelsey took paintbrushes, I took some flowers, and Matt took a tie-dye shirt, and we just kind of hung out and looked around the scene and, just kind of wandered around. I guess we walked down towards the creek. There was a deer there, I remember that. And then we left, and a year later, almost to the date, Kelsey and I went and visited again. It was April 10th, a year later. And we were walking along the creek, and Kelsey, we were kind of spread apart, and Kelsey said, "Amber, come here." And I knew as soon as she said that something was wrong. And I walked over, and there were bones, like in a little cove along the creek. And I don't know exactly what she's doing. She's a surgeon of some sort, or she knows the human body and the human bones. And
This is Kelsey?
Kelsey, yeah. She knew immediately that they were human remains. And the first thing we did was call 911, and we just kind of stood there, and she was like, well, what the hell? Like, well, what is this? Is it another person? Is it part of Katelyn that they didn't find? So when the police arrived, they had told us that they were more than likely deer bones because they looked old, and there was nothing on them. And we left, and come to find out, I guess Dave had contacted Kelsey and told her that they were more of Katelyn's remains. I just think
Was there a big
insane.
bone there, like a femur?
It was a femur and a hip bone.
The Matt that went with Amber to Cedar Grove was her cousin, not Matt Rokamp. Well, let's listen to something else Amber told me about. Listen to who is talking about the OD claim in 2012, a year after Katelyn went missing. This is going to be interesting.
Probably about a year or so after she went missing. That's actually one thing that I think is strange, because Heather, her last name isn't coming to my mind.
Hackney.
Yeah, Heather Hackney. I had gone into Circle K by where I used to live, and she happened to be there, and she stopped and told me, "I know it's not John." Apparently she was hanging out with Mary Holleran a lot, and Mary was into heroin, and she had said, if you notice, Katelyn is wearing more baggy clothing, and that's a sign of someone that's doing heroin. Heather herself is recovering, or I don't know. She's always gone all over the place. But I know that she was into heroin, was. So she had said that that was kind of a sign to her that she was using. And that, I can't remember the name. I know it was a Leo, Lenny, something
Leonard.
with an L, yeah.
It looks like Heather was spreading that same story around long before she told me about it. But remember, as of February 2015, the police never interviewed her. Next time on Gone at 21.
I was requested to do polygraphs on a case by Private Investigator Jay Ryan. It was Katelyn Markham's disappearance and death. And he provided 5 individuals that we were going to test. First being Ashley Griggs, a Heather Hatney, Mary Holloran, Matthew Rokamp, Ryan Isaacs.
That's right, polygraphs. Not everyone passes.
And as far as the results with her test, deception indicated. I left the examination after getting the results and talked to P.I. Green and told him that she either knows something or had something to do with Katelyn's death. Upon questioning him about a question R4, did you dump Katelyn Markham's body in Indiana, which is one of the 4 questions that he was most deceptive to. He continued to deny any involvement in Katelyn Markham's case, stating he didn't know how she died or ended up in Indiana. He wanted out of the room badly, and he started asking where his wife was, where his kid was, in the lobby, wanting to leave.
Make sure you listen to episode 3 of the investigation. It will be coming out March 3rd. On February 22nd, evidentiary notes. We will be listening to the second interview I conducted with Karen Winkler and John Carter on that first trip to Ohio. If you like this podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review. If you would like to help support this podcast, please go to the Gone at 21 Facebook page. There you will see a GoFundMe link pinned to the top of the wall. Just press the link, and any amount you're willing to give will be greatly appreciated. Until next time, I'm Jay Ryan. Take care.